Welcome back to A Complete History of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films, and I'm joined as always by the legendary football writer, Paddy Barclay, to take you on this journey through Old Trafford history. As always, if you're watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening to the audio podcast as well, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. If you do listen back on the audio podcast, do give it a chance to test your eyes on the YouTube version as well, because we do put up a lot of visuals on there that you do miss on the audio version. I don't hope it doesn't ruin the experience for you. I don't think it does. We still try and provide the information either way, but it's a little bit more immersive watching the video. So, Paddy, in the last episode, we took in the 50-51 season, and today we look at one of the defining seasons under Matt Busby, really, on and off the pitch, because there were a lot of moving parts in this season. I guess the best place to start is with the blockbuster summer transfer. We spoke in the last episode how United badly needed wingers. Delaney and Mitten were sorely missed. And you also mentioned that somewhat doomed tradition United have of signing players who impressed in summer tours or tournaments. But when Birmingham knocked United out of the FA Cup in the previous season, a new tradition was born where United would see the best player in the opposition side who give them a bit of a running around, and they earmarked him for an eventual move to Old Trafford. And that was the case with Johnny Berry, wasn't it?
Yes. Johnny Berry had played for Birmingham when they knocked United out of the Cup. United didn't have a great Cup record around this time, but we'll get on to that in this 51-2 season. Johnny Berry, terrific player. If you were to go through all of his attributes as a winger, I suppose you would start with courage. He was irrepressible, a typical winger, but, brave as a lion. And he cost 25,000. He was a class player. He was, there was never any doubt that he would prosper at the higher level with United, and contributors, as you can see from the statistics, 276 appearances, 45 goals, reasonable, chipped in, 1 in 6 goal scorer, and but really an absolute torment for any left back that came up against him. And remember that United had created 2 wing vacancies at the same time. Busby always thought wingers were vitally important. The 51-2 season was to prove that. And Jimmy Delaney had gone back to Scotland to join Aberdeen. His career was winding down. So at last, by signing Johnny Berry, United had a worthy replacement for the 1948 team's outside right, Jimmy Delaney. There was, of course, the vacancy on the left wing, which had been a problem the previous season because of Charlie Mitten's disappearance to Colombia. As the season 51-2 starts, that vacancy is still very much there because Charlie Mitten is still serving his suspension. It's not due to run out until just before Christmas, just before the turn of the year. And, without giving too much away, he will never play for Manchester United again. Busby warned him about that. As we talk now, as the season begins, he's training alone. Busby wouldn't even let him train with the team. And so these 2 great wingers. And the season begins with a little known name at outside left, but it will improve.
Yeah, the name on the left is Ernie Bond, but we'll come to him in a little moment because he is eventually replaced by Roger Byrne, a local lad. And again, as we come through the squad statistic section, we'll talk about these lads in more detail. But Byrne was the guy, really, wasn't he, who broke into the left-hand side and made that his own alongside Aston.
He did. Roger Byrne came in he made his debut in November.
Yeah.
He'd come from born in Gorton,
Yep.
and came from the Ryder Brow boys' club, where he played alongside Brian Statham, later to become one of England's greatest fast bowlers, and a young footballer too, that Brian Statham, that Busby tried to sign, but Statham's dad made him concentrate on cricket, and my word, how that was vindicated. But Roger Byrne really wasn't one of those, given the place he was to occupy in Manchester United's history and the class that he was to display during his sadly curtailed career. He wasn't being chased by everybody. He was nearly 20 when he finally arrived at Old Trafford, being a grammar school boy. He was a bright lad, and he was very, very quick as a player, but not a lot else. Always played down the left-hand side of the park. Hadn't yet found the position in which he was to become a great, but he was right-footed, played on the left. Always seemed to play on the left, and he was a wing half when he came to United. As I say, very, very quick, but wasn't a great tackler. Didn't seem all that terrific. But Busby and Murphy and Wally and Curry and the rest could see something in this pace, and I think it was the beginning of the overlapping fullback, because he was to end up at fullback. But in this season, 1951-2, he came in, started scoring goals, was moved to the left wing, to the mitten position. Hey presto, he's the answer to the left wing problem. Scores goals. He got 2 against Liverpool in a 4-0 victory that somehow said United are here. They took over a number at the top of the league towards the end of January, and by then they were on a roll. And Roger Byrne was outside left, quick as lightning. So you had Byrne and Berry on the wings, and no one's missing Delaney and Mitten anymore. Mitten, by the way, since he's come up in the conversation, around Christmas, he's brought in to see Busby and told, you're going to Fulham. Not, how would you like to go to Fulham, Charlie? You're going to Fulham. They got 22,000 for him, which shows how good he was. Almost every penny of what they'd paid for Johnny Berry.
Yeah.
And that was Mitten, off to Fulham, which, you think, well, could be worse down by the river there. But Fulham were second bottom of the league. So instead of fighting for the title with Man United, Charlie's fighting against relegation with Fulham. So he's still paying a very high price for that very lucrative and very short spell in Colombia.
Yeah, one of those, as we said earlier, with Morris, one of those very early indications of Busby putting the law down. He's saying, this is my way. This is the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
As you said in the last episode with Mitten, initially thinking that he'd gone with Busby's blessing, but not quite the case. Busby was to be quite stern on that matter when Mitten returned, as you mentioned there. Off the pitch in the early part of the season, Paddy, a bit of trauma at the club. We talked about Louis Rocker passing away just before seeing United. So show the fruits of the labour, and the same was for James Gibson. I mean, James Gibson and Louis Rocker, two of the most important men in the entire passage of Manchester United history.
Very much so, yeah.
He passed away in the early part of the season.
He did. He was a few weeks short of what would have been his 74th birthday. Everyone who's followed the series will know that he missed the 1948 FA Cup final. Although the players brought the trophy back before they even went into Albert Square to celebrate in 1948. They stopped off at Gibson's home in North Cheshire and Hale Barnes or wherever it was, and they took the cup up to his bedroom where his sick bed was. And yes, he finally died of a second stroke, a few weeks short of what would have been his 74th birthday. Taking over as chairman was Harold Hardman, former Manchester United player of some distinction and Olympian, I think, and I think he played for England as well. And yes, United director from virtually the end of his playing days in 1912, and then returned to direct the club, to be a director of the club in 1934, and very much after his early tussles with Busby, who thought he stuck his nose into the manager's affairs perhaps a bit too much. After his early tussles, once again, Busby came out on top, and Hardman was not by now a Busby loyalist, and they were to work together successfully. However, just in case, James Gibson had insisted that his son Alan become a director of the club, and Alan had been given a script to follow, which was that Busby's authority must never be questioned. And Alan Gibson was to remain on the board for many, many years. I wouldn't say he was a forceful character or a particularly influential one, but it was good to see the Gibson family tradition maintained by his son Alan's return to the board. But Hardman very much in charge during this of the board, if not Busby, during this highly productive 1951-2 season.
Yeah, United started the season very well, and then there was a sort of mini collapse. I mean, Rowley at the start of the season scored 3 hat-tricks in the first 3 weeks. Loads of goals being scored in there. The competition in the season, in the league in this season, was great because you had all the previous post-war champions championing at the bit at the top, Portsmouth, Spurs, and most notably Arsenal towards the end. But after a strong start, by mid-November, it almost looked like United wouldn't be in a race because they suffered 6 defeats and just 2 clean sheets. I think they were down in 7th at one point. Really, I mean, the story of the season's a little bit funny because, I mean, the defence never really recovered in terms of becoming miserly. They kept only 8 clean sheets from November, conceded 52 in 42 in the league, but it's the goal-scoring power that really came to the fore because Bury and Byrne were just providing, laying all the goals on a plate for those forwards in the middle. Rowley finished top scorer with 30 goals this season. Some very notable games in there, Paddy. The first being at Sunderland. They were 1-0 down with 2 minutes to go, and they scored 2 goals in the last 2 minutes. There's been a little bit of a pattern of late goals in the recent weeks, and one newspaper had quipped about what United's players were supposed to be doing for the first 85 minutes of games, including things like handing tickets out to fans and stuff like that, for the next game. Basically making a light-hearted joke that they weren't doing anything for the first part of the game, but then came alive at the end.
You sometimes can't win when you're a footballer, can you? But it's that is true. It's funny, interesting that you bring this point up because, probably a lot of people, myself included, might imagine that this habit of rescuing causes late in matches began with Sir Alex Ferguson, but clearly it was an early mark of the Busby years as well. I'd never realised that.
I don't know if it was so much part of the character as a quirk of the season, but they followed the Sunderland game with a win over Wolves, where Pearson was in majestic form there, as you see, scoring and being influential as United started the game quite well that time round. In terms of the games against the big rivals, there was a massive game against Spurs in January where United came out on top. Sir Alf Ramsey, as he would later become knighted, scored an own goal on the day, scored for Manchester United. So I guess there's a trivia question in there. How many England managers have scored for Manchester United? Alf Ramsey being one. How many World Cup winners? How many World Cup winning managers have scored for Manchester United? Alf Ramsey getting on the score sheet there.
Well, that's a very good one. I'm going to torment people with that one. Excellent.
Portsmouth, one of the prior champions, did a double over United, and they were the early leaders in the league that season. But United came on really strong in the second half of the campaign, saving the best form, as you mentioned earlier, Paddy, for the last 3 weeks of the season. Really, they were outstanding in the big games. You talked about that 4-0 win over Liverpool. Byrne now on the left wing in number 11, scoring 2 goals.
Yep.
He scored another 2 in a 6-1 win over Burnley. And it basically set up this situation where a lot of people thought it was going to be contrived, actually, that when it went into the last couple of games, because it was all set up nicely for United and Arsenal to go into the last game in a head-to-head for the title. And they did that. But United, when it got to the final day, because of the number of goals it scored, they were fairly comfortable. Arsenal were the nearest challengers, but United only had to avoid defeat by 7 goals to win the league, Paddy.
That's right. But there was drama in the previous game, the game against Chelsea, because it was Monday, Saturday, wasn't it, Wayne? It was, and it's worth. Do you mind if I just dwell a wee bit on the Monday game, because the Arsenal and United were playing at the same time. The great thing was that, in this, basically what boiled down to a 2-horse race, the United had home advantage in both games. And the first of them was the Chelsea game, and United were very nervous. The crowd were nervous. Pearson, one of the remnants from the 48 team, cup-winning team, sort of eased United's nerves a little bit by giving them the lead. But the game changer, I think, from all the accounts, was the second goal. Carey, Johnny Carey, again, a great remnant from the 48 cup-winning side, was playing in midfield, was playing as a wing half at this time. McNulty at right in his cup-winning position at right back, Carey's cup-winning position at right back. And Carey scores a fantastic goal from 30 yards. He just guides it, flights it into the net from 30 yards. And at around the same time, it became known in the crowd that Arsenal were losing. They were at West Brom. And suddenly the tension of this occasion, the penultimate match, lifted. This goal somehow convinced everybody everything was fine. United were going to win the league. And there was one more goal. Henry Coburn, yet another 48 man, wins, shoots, the ball's deflected, 3-0, everything's fine. And there are 2 roars. The final whistle, and then immediately afterwards, the news that Arsenal have lost at West Brom, which means, as you say, that Arsenal would have had to win. Arsenal were at Old Trafford in the final game, and they had to win 7-0. And Joe Mercer, Busby's old pal, on that Monday night sent him a telegram saying, "Congratulations, you've won the league." And whether it was a bit of a mind game by crafty old Joe, who knows? But I think more likely it was an acceptance of the reality of the situation. 7. So Arsenal never had a chance of winning 7-0 when they came to Old Trafford on the Saturday. They lost a player through injury, no substitutes, of course, in those days. They lost a player through injury halfway through the game. They were down to 10 men. So, they were never going to make inroads into those 7 goals that they needed to score. And in fact, lost. And so it was just a day of celebration by a United team who'd finally won the league after a gap of 30 seasons. United were champions of England again.
Incredible. Rowley getting an hat-trick on that last day.
Yeah.
6-1 United win. So, I mean, talk of a crazy score wasn't that absurd. Like United actually put that crazy score on the table. You're quite right. Arsenal had those mitigating circumstances anyway, where they have the man injured quite early on, played with 10 for most of the match. And that was, we'll come to how that would impact Arsenal in the following weeks as well. But it was a big achievement for the men at United. He talks about some of those stalwarts now have been there since the 48 side and earlier than that, really. I mean, Aston, Carey, Chilton, Pearson, Rowley, Carey, all deserving of special praise, especially Carey. But as you mentioned, moving from right back to right half for the majority of the season, really, and putting in not only a sort of captain shift, but making a vital contribution at such a memorable time as well. Really great quote here by Busby towards the end of the season. I'm going to just show a couple of slides on the screen. First of all, this is Manchester United unless Arsenal beat them by 7. Champagne for the champions. And there's this is for the video version, obviously. There's a thing about the goal averages there in the headline, which is made up in tiny print, which is kind of reflective of the kind of dynamics mentally and arithmetic were needed for United to sort of throw the title away, but they didn't. They obviously won 6-1 on the final day. And won the title. There's a picture of the title winning side there, which comes from the following season. A little bit of a spoiler there because there's a charity shield alongside, but we'll come to that in due course as well. But there's the title winning side with some of the directors and Matt Busby.
And there's little in the back row there among the directors and officials is Walter Crickmer, the little man.
Yeah.
And there's Alan Gibson, son of the late chairman. Next to him with the sort of bebbly glasses, and of course Busby standing proudly at the end. Yes, the one or two of the new boys in that team there, notably goalkeeper Reg Allen, and a few stories about him, and of course the aging but unbowed Carey in the front row.
Yeah, Busby's quote at the end of the season, and we'll come to another infamous quote that he made as well, but he said that I said this at the end of the season, it was in his book My Story, which was published a few years later, but he talks about this team and two great lines here. He said, "It is a tragedy that great footballers must, like more expendable humans, grow old, because some, alas, can never be replaced." But I wanted to comment on this because this was a line he wrote before Munich, and I find it compelling. And a lot of people over time have talked about sentiment in football, and I would just want to read this line without context of anything else, devoid of putting it against anything else that happened in United history, just to be taken on its own merits. And I think it reveals a lot about what Busby had envisioned for Manchester United. So he said, it is often stated that there is no sentiment in soccer, but despite all the fine achievements of the present young Manchester United side, I feel we must never lose sight of the contributions made by the older servants of the club. I find that really compelling that he made those comments before Munich happened, that he was talking about wanting to build something more than football. It's just compelling to me that especially when you see this idea that football's ruthless in these days and it's all about winning, and perhaps that's a lot to do with the vision that Alex Ferguson would build in the future. And
I was just going to say that the belief that Busby had in the family and his ruthlessness in excluding people from the family are both the characteristics that we were later to see in Sir Alex Ferguson. It's a very good point. But yes, Busby certainly had been utterly ruthless in chopping both Johnny Morris and Charlie Mitten And just a little mention, we ought to say that Johnny Downey, who replaced Johnny Morris at inside right, attacking midfield, as you would call it now, it's never really quite been lauded in the way he might have been, because he came in and here he is with a league title winners medal. He's a notable member of the team, as indeed McNulty, right back McNulty, is another one who probably isn't a name that trips off the tongue, as would the names of Aston, Carey, Coburn, Pearson, and later Byrne.
Yeah, let's run through the squad then, as always, and get these players their due credit.
Yes, made his debut during the season, didn't he? Jackie Blanchflower, showing how the net has spread even wider from the original Gibson dream of a Manchester team made up of greater Mancunians. Jackie Blanchflower was found sourced from, as they would say now, from Northern Ireland, brother of Danny of Spurs, and terrific talent, who made his debut, replaced sorry about this, Don Gibson. Replaced Don Gibson during the season, and made his debut, and was to become an extremely talented player, and to figure in some big occasions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just, obviously Jackie was in the half-back line.
Could play anywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've put him down as a half-back as his primary position, but as we'll come to...
Well, wasn't a bad keeper either, but that's for another day.
Absolutely. Let's start with the goalkeepers from the season. Reg Allen was the first choice by now, 34 appearances in all competitions, 33 in the league. Jack Crumpton, I think he missed out on a league title medal here, because he was supposed to make 10 appearances back in those days, weren't he? And he made 9 appearances. I'm sure that they must have come up with some dispensation to get him the medal. Jack Crumpton, 9 appearances, all in the league that season, as he was very close to bowing out after the injury problems that he's had. We talked about Jackie Blanchflower there in the half-back line. The other half-back line candidates, Alan B. Chilton played every single league game, 43 in the league, because United only played, 43 in all competitions, because United were eliminated in the FA Cup in the first instance against Hull City.
The shock of the third round up, by the way, yeah.
Henry Coburn, 38 appearances in the league, 2 goals, 39 in all appearances. Don Gibson in the half-back line, 17 appearances. Then you've got Mark Jones. Chilton's standing, really, but again, as we talked about last season, Chilton is always available, so Jones has to make do with 3 appearances in the league. Billy McGlenn, 2 appearances in the league. Jeff Whitefoot, 3 appearances in the league. At full-back, we talked about Johnny Carey, obviously, but he's moved into that half-back line, 39 appearances in all competitions and 3 goals, one of them a title clincher. Billy Redman, 18 appearances in all competitions, primarily at left back, as United were making those changes on that left-hand side. Tom McNulty, 24 appearances at right back and 25 in all competitions. And Roger Byrne, of course, someone that we mentioned earlier on, Gorton Bourne, as Paddy mentioned. He did start the season in the reserves as a left winger. He scored a hat-trick on the opening day in the Central League against Bolton, and that form quickly got him into the first team. Like Blanchflower, he made his debut in that draw at Anfield, the 0-0 in November. But Busby, like Paddy said, he'd been brave and clever enough to see that Byrne could play at left-back as well with the speed that he had. I mean, he was 22 when he made his debut as well. I mean, he played in that number 11 towards the end of the season with Aston behind him. And he scored, as Paddy said, 6 goals in 4 games. A defining contribution at a crucial time. If we move into the forward line, John Aston, mostly, I mean, he did play some games in the forward line, but he was moving back to left back again here. He scored 4 goals in 18 games, all in the league. And Johnny Berry's contribution in that forward line on the outside right. 36 games in the league, 6 goals, 37 in all competitions. That one game in the FA Cup as well. Brian Birch, we've talked about him in earlier episodes. He's played 2 appearances this season and didn't score a goal. Laurie Cassidy, another player we mentioned in previous episodes, just a single appearance this season. Frank Clempson with 2 goals in 8 league games this season. And we talked about Aaron McShane, a veteran who'd come in for a short period of time. He scored 1 goal in 12 league appearances. Paddy championed John Downey, as well he might. He scored 11 goals in 31 appearances, 32 in the league. So a really good contribution from Downey. But the standout players in the season, Stan Pearson, obviously, with 22 goals in 41 league appearances, and Rowley with all those hat-tricks. Surprisingly, he only scored 30 goals, really, but he was a competition top scorer, 30 in the league. If we just move to the last 2 players who we haven't really mentioned so far, did you know that James Bond once played for Manchester United? Well, the name's Bond, James Ernie Bond, who, before he was serving as a secret agent, was playing as an outside left for Manchester United after signing from Leyland Motors in December 1950. Now, he started the season at outside left and did quite well, actually. His best run of form came over Christmas, where he scored in 3 consecutive games. But Bond's place in the team was, unfortunately, a casualty, one of those where Busby was ruthless. As we talked about earlier on, the strong form of Roger Byrne and John Aston was much too formidable for Bond to compete with. So 20 appearances in all competitions, 4 goals. Obviously, the bulk of his career spent in this season, but a commendable shift that he put on the left-hand side when United needed someone to fill in basically the first part of the season until Roger Byrne learned how to swim, and he did so impeccably.
Ernie was one of the guys that Busby and Murphy. I mean, he only cost 300 quid, but he wouldn't have come to the club if Busby, Murphy et al. Had not thought that he might just be the answer to the mitten problem. Didn't quite make it, but 4 goals in 21 appearances, it's not too shabby, is it?
No, and one of the oldest living league title winners with Manchester United as of recording of this podcast. Incredible, really, and like I said, a very notable contribution considering that it came in at a time when United desperately needed some balance on that side, and he provided that. Less significant contribution from John Walton, who he's a centre forward. He signed, or an inside forward really, because he came in and stood in for Downey for 2 appearances. Now he transferred from Bury for free in July 1951, and he transferred back to Bury for free in July 1952. Made 2 early season appearances standing in for Downey. He had a run in the reserve team, scoring a couple of goals in there. But even then, the quality coming through at reserve team level meant that he wasn't going to have a career at the club. We'll talk through the tactics very quickly. We see Reggie Allen. We talked about the various changes throughout the season. Byrne playing some at left back, Bond playing some on the left hand side down the wing as well, and some of those other forward players who made a contribution that's not insignificant, and some of those younger players like Jones and Whitefoot, who we can't really put in the side yet because the mainstays are there, like Coburn and Carey and players like that. So you're not going to, and Gibson, obviously, he would play in that half-back line, or it might fill in right back as well. So you've got Allen in goal, McNulty at right back, as Paddy mentioned earlier, certainly deserving of praise for his contribution. Here, Chilton, a rock at the centre-back position, and probably getting better with age, really, Chilton. You talked about in earlier episodes that he'd been probably unfairly singled out sometimes, that his errors normally led to goals, but normally in United did concede 52, so maybe Chilton can shoulder some of the blame for that this season. But it was generally accepted that he was getting better with age. Aston at left back, Carey and Coburn in that half back line, Downey and Pearson the inside forwards. Downey really had stepped in and done well, stepped up and done a job. Berry and Byrne now looking like the new wing force, supporting Rowley with the goals. Rowley in sensational form this season. But yeah, I also mentioned Bond earlier on. You've got to say that he deserves a shout alongside Byrne on that left-hand side. The academic sort of stuff that we go through, United's colours haven't changed. Again, they're still in red at home and blue away. The programme is still the same with the handshake at the top. The average home attendance this season was 41,374, with the biggest attendance, 54,245 against Manchester City. You'd say the key results for United this season, Paddy, some big results really. The double-hander over Arsenal, where they won 3-1 at Hardman, won 6-1. Obviously, that was the swing which won the title. The morale-boosting, entertaining win over Spurs in January, and the running results with the 4-0 win over Liverpool and the 2-6-1s, which defined the outcome of the title. Elsewhere in England, Arsenal's injury woes, as we talked about earlier on, they continued to hurt them the following week. They lost against Arsenal in the FA Cup final. So a great period for...
Again, was it Newcastle?
Yeah, against Newcastle, yeah.
Newcastle, very much the team of the FA Cup in the 1950s, as we see. But you're quite right, Arsenal. It is only fair to say that Arsenal were very unkindly treated by injuries during the season.
And then one little thing, United went on tour again, and we're not going to talk about that this episode because they set sail for another tour in North America. But before they went, Paddy, a little note to close, which is a significant moment in United history, really, because at the club's AGM shortly after winning the title, Busby had boldly proclaimed that the club had at least £200,000 of talent beyond the first team. The reserve team this season, and we're talking about the reserve team now. I'm not talking. There are names far beyond this that we're not even going to get a mention here. But the reserve team included the likes of Roger Byrne, who made his debut, Blanchflower, who made his debut, Jones, Whitefoot. All these youngsters who'd already made the debut, but there's Eddie Lewis, a prolific scorer at lower level. David Pegg had been scouted and brought to the club, and he was highly covered throughout the country. These are obviously players that we'll talk about in future episodes. Ray Wood, a goalkeeper who'd made his debut already. Dennis Weiler, a local striker who'd come up through the ranks. Bill Folkes, another local lad. A lot of these young lads are in there, and these were the lads who basically Busby was saying are worth £200,000, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you haven't mentioned Eddie Lewis yet.
Yeah, like I said, a prolific goal scorer at that level.
Big lad, but he wasn't big enough. Can I tell you a story about Eddie Lewis?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what we're here for.
Are we allowed to? Allowed one little bit of naughty language?
Yeah, we can do that. We'll bleep it out, or if we don't bleep it out, cover the ears of sensitive children.
Because it also pertains to Reg Allen. And the previous episode, we mentioned that Reg Allen, Busby, had broken the world record for a goalkeeper in paying £11,000 to QPR for the Londoner Reg Allen. But and was vindicated when Reg Allen helped United to a league championship medal. So that's all great, but there was still this hierarchical setup in the United dressing room. The senior players were very much the senior players, and of course Allen, with his pedigree, was very much one of those, as from the moment he walked into the club, along with the waspy-tongued Rowley and so on. They were the kings of the dressing room. But Eddie Lewis, there was a big lad, and he fancies himself a bit. And one day he comes into the dressing room, the first team dressing room, did Eddie, and he sees the first team aren't there, and he's with a few of his mates from the reserve and youth team, and he sees Reg Allen's jar of Brill cream. Now, Brill cream, for the younger people listening and watching to this, was the gel of its time. It was a hair preparation that you put on your head, and Reg Allen had a very slicked, elegant not a hair out of place hairstyle. He was a good-looking lad. And Reg's jar of Brill cream, nobody touched that. Nobody, you weren't really meant to look at it, never mind touch it. But Reg wasn't there. And so Eddie Lewis swaggers into the dressing room, sees the jar of Brill cream and thinks, I'll have a bit of that. And the others were saying, no, Eddie, don't touch that. That's Reg's Brill cream. They cried this out as one. Eddie replies, fuck Reg. And he walks over to the thing and helps himself, opens the jar of Brill cream and scoops out a hefty dollop, puts it on his hair. Anyway, how Alan found out about this, I don't know, but he did. And he went for Eddie Lewis. Now, Lewis was a big lad, but Reg was a hard man. And he grabbed him and he took him by the throat in such a grip, and he was screaming blue murder, that everybody thought he was going to kill him. And by the time Bert Wally and Tom Curry were sent for, and they came and tried to pull Reg off Eddie Lewis, but by the time they'd managed to drag him away, Eddie Lewis's face was turning blue and his tongue was hanging out. Suffice it to say that he never pinched Reg's Brill cream again.
I love it. But it's worth saying that kind of boisterousness was what stood these lads out, these youngsters out. They were so good at reserve team level because they were brave enough to go against these senior lads and not be feared by them. And Lewis was, as we mentioned, a prolific goal scorer at reserve team level and was making waves. These were the players, Paddy, as I mentioned, £200,000. At the time, the British transfer record was £34,500, which was set when Jackie Sewell went to Sheffield Wednesday. So he's basically saying, I've got 5 or 6 players here who will be as good as anyone in the country, which is a remarkable boast.
Yeah, if you take what's the world transfer record now, a couple of 100 million. So he's basically saying, in modern terms, he's got a billion quid's worth of talent in the reserves. And if you go through them, it's not ludicrous, because these were players who were to emerge as challengers to the best in Europe. So, and there were world-class players world-class talents among them. So, although it was a boast that took the breath away, it wasn't the ramblings of an idiot. It was tenable.
And it is worth saying that the reaction from the journalists at the time were to take it seriously. They took what he was saying very seriously. It wasn't dismissed out of hand. They were saying, oh my God, this could be true. The issue that we've got, obviously, at this point in time, is that there's no proof of this because there's no competition set up to prove these kids are good enough. And it is also worth mentioning that when Busby's listing, he's not listing the players, but when he's quoting that value, it doesn't include the presence of one Duncan Edwards, who'd yet to sign for the club. And we'll talk about, obviously he's going to come around very quickly in this, but they were trying to get that signature over the line, which they were trying to do as Busby set sail for North America to take the lads back over there and see how that would fare that time, see who they could rub shoulders with this time. And we'll be back with the next episode, picking up from that point as well, to see just how prophetic Busby's words are. Said, if you are watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening to the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. Thanks for watching and listening to this episode, which covered Sir Matt Busby's first championship winning team.